Thank you everyone for coming. Quick introductory, my name is Randy Pagels. I work for Microsoft. I'm based in Detroit. I've been at Microsoft about 16 years now. Currently I'm helping customers, my job basically is educate customers on app dev practices, modernization of applications, how to use them in the cloud, how to rebuild them using DevOps or GitHub, especially leaning more towards GitHub these days. This talk's about 45 minutes long or so. At the end, we'll have some time for Q&A if there's any questions, and I'll try to address as many things as I can. Hopefully, you'll find some information here you may not have known. This is really going to be a little bit about monitoring and a little bit about application insights. So I was just talking about this light in my face here. I can't see anybody, so even if I ask questions, I won't know if anybody asks or replies. So we'll just go through this. I thought I would share a little bit of information about some news that we have just because these sessions are online. They're still very valuable. So GitHub Universe, if you're looking at GitHub, GitHub is kind of the way of the future for repos and pipelines. So you may want to look at that. All these recordings are here available. These will be in the slide deck here as well. Visual Studio 22 is the latest, greatest IDE that you'll see some of that today with some of my demos. So there's some links here as far as that goes. .NET 6 is one of those. Maui was delayed a little bit, but it is coming. And then, of course, we're working on .NET 7 now, so how fun is that? And the other one I enjoy is this .NET conference. So I'm sure we'll have a 2022 one, but these recordings are still quite valid. So again, in the slide deck here, hopefully I'm not going too fast. If I do, just speak up. This talk's a little blend of continuous monitoring, what Application Insights is. I'm going to show you to the depths of App Insights as well, but I have to start a little higher level and what it looks like. Microsoft's definition of DevOps is this, the union of people, process, and products to enable continuous value. And continuous value is the key in this whole sentence. If you're not delivering value, how do you know you're making any changes? And we're talking CI/CD pipelines. A lot of app dev teams I talk to, they're delivering often, but are they delivering value? How do you know if you don't measure it? A lot of tools out there to measure the value, measure if an app's being used, who's using it, from where, how long, and App Insights is one of those tools that I'm going to talk about today. Continuous monitoring, again, that's going to give you a heartbeat of your application out. Look at how it's performing, what it's doing, any failures or exceptions. If you're using .NET, sometimes .NET swallows errors. App Insights will track and catch those for you. But continuous monitoring is really from this idea that you keep it in mind and start it from the get-go, from planning, like let's say you're planning a sprint, grooming through backlogs, from developing, testing, CI/CD, et cetera, all the way out to the end, and it's just one continuous loop, right? That's the idea here. If you're using the Azure DevOps product, it's an actual Microsoft product. It has a long history if anyone's using this product out there, but these are some of the key components of the product. These are all used independently. You can flip switches and turn these off if you want. I'm going to show you just a ever so brief Azure pipelines. That's the heart and soul, I think, of Azure DevOps. This is where it's real. You compile, build, and deploy. Azure repos are there as well, but GitHub repos are, again, these work interchangeably. So if you have used either one of these, generally today, I hope everyone's using source code at some point in time. So Azure Monitor, again, Azure is the service for running. There's a lot of great app services out there for creating, building, and monitoring and deploying applications themselves, and there's a bunch of ways to do this. I was just saying this talk I usually give is like 90 minutes because we do a lot. I like to do a lot of demos and show you a lot of things. Today will be a little compressed. I will state this, if there are questions that are burning, come down and see me. I'll hang out here afterwards as well. But the idea is Azure Monitor, think of it as an umbrella of monitoring. So they call it a unified monitoring model, and it contains all the metrics from all the services, whether you're checking in source code or a service running an API call, you name it, it's collected into a database called the metrics in a log file. The idea now is you can use data-driven insights to basically pull that telemetry out and look at and slice. Basically, you can slice and dice this app up and see what's going on. But it's not just about the app, it's about the infrastructure it runs on as well. And then there's workflow integrations that I'll talk to. I'll show you just an easy example of .NET being deployed out of DevOps pipelines. So unified monitoring, think of this as, again, it's part of Azure. You deploy your application to it. A lot of times, if you're using all the app dev services that are out there, it just wires up Application Insights magically, and that's air quoted. but it will just work now. Last few iterations, they've updated it. But it also monitors the operating systems. If you're running AKS, if you're running containers, you're running any other different resources across subscriptions or resource groups or you name it, we're collecting all this data. Then on the right-hand side of this slide is how we can get the insights. So only one square here is application insights, right? So application insights, we can look at the resource groups across virtual machines if your app's running in a virtual machine, a container, whatnot. And then visualizing this data. My demos today will look at the portal. The Azure portal allows you to look at this data in so many different ways that it really just depends on what you're looking for. So the main user of App Insights would be like an app dev team, an application development team would benefit from this. Our Azure DevOps teams uses Application Insights to monitor its usage worldwide, and they have a board up. I'll point that out when I show you that piece there. Other ways to visualize, if you're not using the portal, you can export that data in a continuous manner. I can pull it into Power BI. You can throw it, we create these workbooks that are, basically think of the workbooks as predefined reports, and I can just run those automatically. Other ways is Metrics Explorer, Log Analytics built into Azure. So I can take whatever query I'm looking at, throw it into Log Analytics, manipulate that, save it off as a favorite, and rerun that as well. And of course, it's always nice to get alerts. Something goes wrong, something's too long, maybe your app's taking too long to the home page or whatever test you're running against it. Whatever metrics you set up, you can get text or paged or emailed. So those are just built-in responses to those. And what's nice too is you can actually have an alert that's set up when your app is being bogged down or overloaded by either CPU or just timings or cycles. You can have an alert auto-scale that app up automatically. And then when everything's good, it will auto-scale it back down. And it's just built into the service and fabric of Azure. And then there's integration points as well. So different services inside of Azure will let you integrate that. So I'm going to get my glasses on here. The unified monitoring, I'm going to go ahead and go like this. Again, one metric, one alert system. This came together a couple years ago or so. It used to be independent from apps and infrastructure, but we put it together as one. And the idea of resource groups as well. So generally speaking, when you're building an app, you may put the similar components into one resource group. And that's just a logical container. So what they did was allow you to look at that full stack visibility across that resource group. And I'll show you what that looks like. But this really gives you a one-stop shop, one pane of glass to see how that app is running across all the different services that it runs on. So if you really want to know the health of your application, this is a fun tool to play with if you want to look at it. So looking at end-to-end diagnostics of an app itself, I'm going to show you this map, but in much bigger form than this. But you can monitor your app in the cloud. We support a lot of different languages. I'll cover those in just a second here. The application map, though, allows you to look at it's kind of a visualization of high level, all the different components that make up your app, all the calls in and out of it, and it tracks it in real time. So whenever there's a problem you want to diagnose, that would be a great place to start, is with that map. And then we also allow you to drill in. These are all deep links. You can drill into any failures or exceptions or performance issues you're having. Now, if you're a .NET developer using Visual Studio, or Visual Studio, specifically Visual Studio Enterprise, you can actually pull down the snapshot debugging logs from a production instance running into either, again, snapshot debugging or profiling. So those are there. I'll point those out when I show those to you. A lot of integration with other tools as well. So Simon tools, API tools, a lot of third-party tools. There's export points, Splunk, etc. So Application Insights, we're clicking down now. App Insights itself, think of these, a few different scenarios here. So the visibility into your app, you can actually set up a dashboard that looks something like this. Think of this as the big picture. You're looking at your data flow in and out. You're looking at number of exceptions. You're looking at hits. You're looking at users. You're looking at everything going well, hopefully. But if things don't go well, we can display that as well. And then how do you find and fix a problem? There's a lot of insights you can look at in here as well. So we can look at exceptions and failures and drill into those. Again, if you're using a language like a .NET or a .NET Core, we can actually look at line numbers, etc. Then the idea too is for continuous monitoring is to integrate that with some pipelines. So now we can actually integrate when you deploy. If you're using automation, which is one of the key factors for success in using DevOps, is automate everything if you can. Use infrastructure as code if you can. And what you can do with, whether you're using GitHub or the pipeline, is insert a marker. I'll call it a marker. It's an annotation when you deploy your code that puts that into the telemetry of App Insights, which is really cool now. As you're doing different versions, you can actually see if it's making it any improvements or making the app worse by the data itself. And how would you know that if you didn't have a marker in that data? So I'll show you that as well. And then monitoring it. You may have apps running in containers, along with app services, perhaps. Maybe they're API calls. We can monitor all that. You just, again, as they're connected, all that data is correlated with a correlation ID inside of App Insights. And be very clear, I will say this probably multiple times, is App Insights is an Azure service. It runs in the cloud. So no matter where your app runs, it has to be able to push data into App Insights. And there's multiple ways to set that up. And again, I'll point that out when I show that to you. Let's move on. Make sure that's right. So ingestion of data, again, we have open source SDKs. So you can install an SDK into your application. If you're doing .NET apps and you're deploying to Azure, a lot of that wiring is done for you. You can just build a web app, build an API app, or anything that supports this in Visual Studio, deploy it out to Azure, and again, it's ingrained in the Azure fabric to just wire that up for you. Nothing you need to do, which is pretty awesome. It collects most of the data you need. You can also collect custom data. So if you want something specific that's not PII, perhaps, like IP addresses or usernames or credit card numbers, we don't collect that automatically. You have to put that in by yourself in custom, again, called custom telemetry collecting. Something running on a virtual machine, let's say, we can install a status monitor. That's also another way. If you're doing mobile development, the App Center, Visual Studio App Center allows you to collect telemetry from building a mobile app. When Maui comes out, I'm sure that'll be in part of that as well. And then exploring that data, that's where you can actually start slicing and dicing it, and I'm going to show you some of that. Through the Azure portal, through application maps, live metrics stream, which is pretty cool. Live metrics stream shows your app in real time, shows anything, exceptions that are thrown in real time, lets you act on them in real time. And then Visual Studio IDE, if you're using Visual Studio, of course, you can pull that data down into Visual Studio and look at it as well. And then how do you export this? There's some different ways to do that. You can, Power BI can just pull that data out. I could use, let's say, Azure Functions or Logic App, pull that data out. There's a service called Stream Analytics that will pull that data out for you. And Azure DevOps, of course. And there's just the continuous export. The way App Insights works is this window of data that moves. So you set that up if you want 30 days of data, or 60 or 90. It's all based on the size of how much data you want to collect, and then it just drops off. So if you need that data a long time, you'll want to export it. And then on the bottom here is the different cloud and support, the hybrid support here for basic languages, C, C#, VB, Java, JavaScript, Go, Python's on here, Ruby, .NET Core, Java, etc. And then as far as logger frameworks, Log4Net's here, nlog, Java, JLog. A lot of the most common logging frameworks are also supported. The instrumentation deployed apps, again, that's when you just take an app that you're going to run in Azure and it's an Azure friendly, or I say friendly, but an Azure app that's built for like .NET, for instance, it's just going to work. There's not much to do here, especially when you deploy to an app service or a function app. It's just built into the system, so that's really nice. I talked about the SDKs on here, just here for that. One note on pricing. Again, it's an ingested data amount. I think the default here is 5 gig. There's a pricing monitor calculator on site, but if you say it's 5 gig a month, $276 a gig per month, generally defaults to 31 days, and that multi-stepped web test will go away someday, but right now it's $10 a test. And then ping tests, so availability. Hey, does my app have a heartbeat or not, right? There's different ways to set this up, because you're probably thinking, well, at 5 gig a month, well, how far does that get me? Well, that depends on the complexity of your app, how much custom telemetry you collect, and how much data you want to collect. Recommendation is use active sampling. We say that about 50%. So every other call, every other transaction gets measured. Once there's a problem, you can crank that up all the way 100%, collect it more. If you're running an app in production on Azure, you can install snapshot debugging, which will take some snapshots every so many minutes. We don't want to bog the system down, but that's the most common is that. Fixed rate sampling, again, you can tell it, hey, reduce the volume of data I'm going to collect. I don't need everything. So it's not recommended to put it all the way up. So blending that with continuous monitoring, again, building and testing, you'll want to integrate, I'll show you how easy it is to get started if you're using Visual Studio to actually say, hey, I want to add App Insights into this, into here. I could be running it locally, I could be running it in the cloud, et cetera. And then I can track, if I'm testing locally, maybe I'm doing my inner loop is on my laptop here. I can use Code Lens above my classes to actually look at how that's coming in. I'll point that out. And then debugging performance monitoring items here as well. And then if you were running load tests, so Azure has a new service called Azure Load Test, of course, it's called Azure Load Test, or any other load testing service, but you want to pound on your application and collect the metrics there. If you're using any UI testing, there is another library, it's an open source library called Playwright. Fantastic for synthetic testing and UI automation. I'll show you inside of the App Insights portal where you can do availability tests. And then I'll talk about our roadmap at the end here, on what's going on there. And what's also nice is if you're actually debugging something that's not quite running right, if you're using DevOps or GitHub, you can create an issue or a work item right from that. A nicety. So CI/CD, obviously in the pipeline, you're going to want to insert some of those annotations. Those are just bookmarks. Think of a deck of cards, and you're putting a marker in there. And if you're using Azure DevOps pipelines, there's this concept of pre and post approval processes, or gates, quality gates. And a quality gate is something that you can set up to be maybe an HTTP endpoint. I want to call a REST API. I want to call an Azure function, logic app, et cetera. I want to check the health of that app before I do the next thing. So for automation purposes, that just gets that manual approval processes out. Again, for instance, the Azure DevOps team deploys about 7 times a day, and they have this thing called progressive exposure where we're using these quality gates to automate what would normally be done by a human. Here we have to stop and wait for somebody to approve something. So we automate as much of that as possible. I talked about production snapshot debugging here already. Set up alerts is also nice. Set up those alerts or notifications when something's going awry. Hopefully you'll get alerted before your customer does, which is nice. So Azure DevOps, for instance, again, that runs as a service. It runs on top of Azure like GitHub does. App Insights is wired up to it. The product group gets alerts prior to even customers calling it in generally. That's the ideal situation, of course. So let's go off and look at a few things. I'm going to walk through a little bit of, just briefly, Visual Studio. I'm going to show you some Azure DevOps pipelines on what a quality gate would look like, just as an example. Dive into Azure Monitor, and then we'll spend the rest of the time until Q&A anyway, till on Application Insights. Sound like a plan? All right, so let's go here. Make sure that comes up. Hopefully you can see that okay. It's quite bright here, so. This is Visual Studio. If you just said file new project, I just created a web app. That's all this is. And the only piece I wanted to show you, I could have created an API app as well, but what I wanted to show you how easy it is to get started with App Insights is you basically right-click on the project file itself and say Add. It's right here. It'll say Application Insight Telemetry. And when I set that up, it's going to ask me, am I running this locally, right, using the SDK? It'll collect telemetry locally. Or if I set it up in Azure already, now I have an instrumentation key. I can set it up there and just point to it. So if I say, yeah, I already have this set up, we're good. It'll go to my subscription. I put that subscription in, and then it'll ask me to pick some App Insight resource that's already running out there. So think of that as if you're going to correlate different components, like a mobile app, maybe an API app, or another app that isn't necessarily in the same project, keep the same instrumentation key. Always write that same data. It's very important to write it to the same instance of App Insights so it correlates it correctly. It's really highly discouraged to try to blend data afterwards. It's just really a pain to do that. So anyway, so I can pick an instance here. I'll go ahead and just I'll pick this one. It also allows me to set up a connection string in my secrets folder. If you're using .NET Core, like you're not using app settings anymore, you're using a secrets file here, so we can just say, yeah, that's fine. And then it asks me, what do I want to collect? Code, NuGet packages. It's going to install these secrets for me. It's going to set up the app settings, which is only local. And it'll do that for me, and then we're good to go. So of course, rather than show you all that, we'll just look at an existing app. So this is an existing, same thing, web app with a lot more in it. Functions, API calls, etc., database. One of the things I wanted to show you was this. Hopefully, let's see if Zoom works. Yeah, it does. Look at that. So Code Lens is above the classes here. I don't know if you've seen this before. It's been around a while. It's not new. But Code Lens, if I was developing this locally and I'm testing locally, even on a test server, my requests and exceptions would show up here. And that's an App Insights thing. I can turn that on and off. Now, this app happens to run in Azure, so when I set this up, I said I'm pointing to an Azure instance. So what I can do is I can come over to, I can go up to File or View here and say Other Window. And I can look at my App Insights telemetry. Because a developer, your head's down, you're in Visual Studio, I want to look at my data. So with that, I can come over here and say, I'm going to look at it. Remember, I said everything's a time window. Everything you see that I'm going to show you is all about time. I'm just going to pick 3 days. Show me all the telemetry collected in 3 days on this app in the cloud. And that could be, this is off a dev server right now, actually. And what this does is pull all the different calls. Here, I'll zoom in a little bit here. This pulls in a number of calls, my availability tests. So each of my pages I set up is a heartbeat, which we call availability test, and it just does a ping. It's all it is a ping. It's not a use case. I have custom events. Remember, I can write custom events. When I get to a point, I want to insert data into telemetry data. I can then it breaks it out by dependency, exceptions, etc., requests, trace files, and so forth. And what's cool is all the data comes back here. And I want to show you this. Hopefully you can see this on the left-hand side. The way App Insights collects data is sliced into many categories based on what you're doing. So I insert the version of the app. It's nice to have a side-by-side version of the app, so when I deploy, I can compare those two. I can look at, I'm doing availability test. If you're using App Insights, of course, you have access to the entire world's data centers of Microsoft. So I set up ping tests from Australia, from Japan, West, etc. You can pick and choose wherever you want these tests, and it'll actually break it down that way. I can look at the different pages that I have, whatever the pages are set up, or API calls, and so forth and so on. And there's just a ton of data here. So that's a lot to look at, right? So let's say I want to look at just the custom events. Now this is a health app, so it tracks food, eaten, and exercise. So if I wanted to see where anywhere called was banana, that's just something funny that we wrote in here, I can narrow the search down of the data, which goes out to Azure, pulls all that data back into Visual Studio. And the whole point of showing you this is I have access to the stuff I'm about to show you in the portal, I have access to it in Visual Studio. And if I click on one of these events, so this is an API call. When I click on one event on the left here, I'll have the actual detailed information at that point in time, where it came from. So here's the time of day that this was called. This was an API put, tells me the role it was in, what .NET version SDK was used, etc., and a lot of information. I told you about custom, I just want to show you this. So if I were to instantiate a telemetry, it's just called telemetry client. So I insert that into my .NET app, and at the top, and all I need to do is say telemetry track, and then give it a string, and it'll insert that data for me. Again, it inserts it at the time it was called, which is, I think, pretty awesome. I can track logs. There's a few other properties here I can track, but track events pretty much the most common one. All right, moving right along. Let's get out of Visual Studio and go into the actual portal here. Start right here, I hope. My portal kept refreshing. I've been trying to keep this refreshed here. Quick on Azure DevOps pipelines. So this is just a pipeline for deploying the app. Deploy out the Dev QA. These are the pre and post approval processes before and after a deployment. So for instance, I wanted to show you that annotation. When I deploy the app, I want to insert a marker. If I look at the logs, you can see at the very bottom here, with every deployment, I insert this release annotation. And that's just a command out of, I'm using a YAML pipelines. Again, that's the most common these days. Very popular using YAML, so it just inserts that here. GitHub Actions, same thing. But it's important to put I'll show you where that shows up as well. And then I move along. Now, before this code, this is a really super simple example, but before that code moves to production, I'll just call it a production instance. If you're using app services, you can use slots and stuff, but these are actually different resource groups. There's this concept of quality gates. Now, just to be clear, this does not exist in GitHub Actions. This only exists in the pipelines, and this is what we use to deploy Azure DevOps. Windows 11, Visual Studio, Bing, Office, etc. Some of the major products that are out there. Anyway, these are quality gates I can set up. There's probably 6 or 8 I can pick from. I can pick endpoints, and when that endpoint returns true, moves ahead in the quality gate, automatically approves itself and moves forward. So for me, I just for laughs, I created a response time. When this web app gets deployed, I hit it with a little bit of a load test and make sure that response time is less than, I think I said 15 seconds, because who wants to wait that long? So that's what it's doing. And you can tell it how many times to check. I said 3 times every 5 minutes. I make sure that the CPU is okay on the app service as well. And then I make sure my APIs are alive and can be called as well. If any one of these checks is red, it won't deploy. So again, completely automated. I didn't have to touch this. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Depends on what's going on. So that's important to put in there. Now, I'm going to jump ahead just ever so slightly and show you what this marker looks like. It's hard to show App Insights without showing you the marker first. This should work, right? So that's the tick mark. So this is just some of the data that came in. I'm looking at performance data, and this is one of the markers. So if you deployed whatever multiple times a day, I'd have multiple markers here, and I can start comparing it. Now, what's interesting right off the bat here is that marker showing me where it got deployed, and after it got deployed, there was a spike in performance, and then it leveled off again. Every time I deploy, that happens. So at some point, I'm going to actually look into that. But right now, for now, we're just going to leave it alone. But the point is, with the marker, I can see exactly what's going on there. And I can also click on that marker and show me the release. So it came out of GitHub. It was a push. Happened on 5.6, et cetera, et cetera. So I can look at the actual deployment. Now it won't let me go back, will it? There we go. Okay. All right, moving right along. So I mentioned the resource group. So this is a resource group, again, in Azure. This is a large application. It's a web app. It's like a ticketing system. So when something goes wrong, people call in for tickets. A service person's assigned, and that's what this is. This is a large app. But my point of showing you this is that App Insights is built in around this as well, because, again, it's generally a decent idea. It depends on the app, how you architected it, to put the resources in here in the same resource group. This resource group has 44 different resources in here. Even right here, I can see there's 2,750 alerts on this resource. Across applications, compute, networking, storage, I can drill in any point. I can just jump in wherever I want here. So App Insights, again, wrapped around this resource group. Keep that in mind. Moving right along here, we're going to move to this is the home blade. So you'll see if I create an App Insights instance from Visual Studio, I can say, hey, start dumping my data into here. What is key, no pun intended, is this instrumentation key. Very important to keep it correlated together. So all these components that are running just keeps on pumping data into the same key. And then at the very top here, I can actually look at 1 hour, 30 minutes. It goes down to 30 minutes up to 30 days. If you collect more than that, this doesn't change. But I can look at server response time, failed requests. Ideally, that number is lower, but in this case, not so much. Again, even on the dashboard, I can see what's going on with this app. So what I want to do is just walk through quickly here. Just again, the idea today is just to show you a little bit about App Insights, enough to maybe you'll want to go try it or play with it. I have some resources at the end here we can look at. First thing is application map. This, I think, is one of the most useful things. This is an application map for, let me just zoom in a little bit here. Not too much. As your components are writing data to that instrumentation key, Azure is smart enough to start linking these together as components and services. So there's an API call, there's a web service call. Availability tests are those pings from different data centers. This app is writing to Azure table storage, blob storage, queue storage, you name it. It's all written here. And even right at this point, I can look and I can see some of the delays. 25% of my calls are failing to blob storage for some reason. I can see it's taken 12.5 milliseconds to write whatever it's writing to blob storage. And as a developer, I can use this map to start looking into this. It's like most of my failures are coming from here. I can click on that instance, and it'll start moving the blades on the right-hand side over, and I can look at my top 3 failing requests or my slowest request here by and I'm not going to start investigating that. So the map is quite useful that way. If you prefer the hub and spoke model, I can actually look at it this way, so you can move it around. Just depends on how you want to look at it. Sometimes it's nice, you can print this out and put it up on your wall, pretty cool too. Going down on you notice that on the left here, it's all your tools to investigate a problem. Smart detection. I might have set this up already. Let me try that. Smart detection. So again, Application Insights uses machine learning and cognitive services running the app. So it monitors the app and knows what the norm is, what the basic average running app looks like, right? For that app. And then for anything that's outside of the boundaries, like let's just pick on this one. It says, hey, the server response time, it used to be this, but now it's this, and it's affecting 3.2% of your users, maybe you should look into this. It just monitors things that are going on in your app and reports them back to you on this blade. You can actually configure this and set this up as well. So this is a nice thing as well. Live metrics. Let's see if this refreshed okay. Here we go. Live metrics. Again, this is actually on a monitor in the Azure DevOps team room that monitors the running of Azure DevOps, which is, again, a global service. But here, they can actually watch telemetry. You'll probably see some on the right-hand side here as it hits any errors or trace files or log files or errors, whatever it comes up with. It's giving it to me live. Also showing me all the different requests that are coming in, ongoing and so forth. And then it shows me the overall health of the application itself. If you're running across VMs, let's say you're running across Azure Functions, and it's auto-scaling, auto-scaling multiple machines up. On the bottom will tell me the number of servers and how long the servers are being hit. This is about, you probably can't read it, it says 10 seconds on average. So this is a web app made up of 44 components that's running. So anyway, this is called Live Metrics. Shows you what's going on. Transaction search, I won't spend a lot of time on this because I just did. This is the same transaction search I showed you from within Visual Studio. It's here as well in the portal. One thing I liked about this is, not only does it show me all the different calls, again, I can slice and dice, I can search for things, I can actually group it. There's a little group button here, and I can group it by my favorite errors or my favorite traces. And it gives you kind of a high-level view. So if you didn't know you had problems with your app, you may, and you didn't even know it, right? Here's availability test I talked about. Again, this is an idea here is if I look at one of these tests, this is an app that's not mine, so I may not have access to it. The idea here on availability is to go like this. Set up you basically set up a ping test. So give me a URL. It doesn't matter if it's an API URL or an endpoint. It'll run ping tests, and you can run it every 5, 10, or 15 minutes to make sure it's alive from anywhere in the world, which is pretty nice. And if it's not, I can actually click on, here's something that failed. I can click on that X, and it'll give me this end-to-end transaction on why it failed, and we can drill in a little more. I'll show you this a little more in just a minute. So availability tests are important. Again, I can set those up any way I want. I'll mention now because we may run out of time. That's a single ping test. What's really nice is be able to set up a use case, right? A customer goes to your site and clicks here, does this, does that, enters this, deletes this. Set up an end-to-end a scenario, and we can actually record that in Playwright, and that's a preview project that's coming out soon. I can take that Playwright test and run it from my availability test, and now I have a real test, right? Right now, this is just a kind of a heartbeat test. Let me show you failures. The failure blade here. Again, this is showing me time. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry, my bad. This is showing me, again, time. So if I stick to the 3 days, show me a window of data of failures. On the bottom is showing me all the different type of failures that are here. We'll zoom in a little bit. So if I were a developer on this app, on this team, I would start with employees creating records seems to fail way more than looking at details. In fact, it fails quite a bit. I get a lot of information just from this blade itself. There's a couple other bells and whistles here. You notice this timeline. So if you have a spike like right there that happened at 9:00 something p.m., I could actually take these sliders and move it in and get into a little, just kind of narrow down the data is all it's doing, is filtering it. So that's pretty cool. I can also look at dependencies. So hey, this app's calling data, calling blob storage, table storage, etc. I can look at blob storage. Seems to fail quite a bit. We saw that in the application map. Now all these things are starting to correlate back together. The application map pointed this out. This is pointing it out. There's 9.6 thousand errors here in the last 3 days. Not good. What's nice is I can actually go down to the bottom, either look at samples or snapshot debugging. We'll start with samples. Now again, I mentioned machine learning. So machine learning also looks at the failures and performance data, telemetry that's coming in, and says, hey, I have, what did I say, 2,000? I have 9,000 of these. Which one do you want to start with? I think you should start with this one. I give you a suggested one, which is always nice. So with that, this will give me this end-to-end transaction here. Let me collapse this a little bit. This gives me the walkthrough, the calls for that transaction and why it failed, where it failed, when it started, where it came in at. I would click on the end here, and then on the right-hand side, it just gives me some more information, gives me the command, et cetera, where it came, what time it came in, and so forth. Now that's great. Again, and if you wanted to get to this later, I could say, hey, create a new work item. Create a new work item would be wired up to Azure DevOps or GitHub issues board. So that's an option. Back to that same data, if I were to say, no, I want snapshots. These are the snapshot debuggers that are collecting information that I could take Visual Studio 2022 and load it up and look at it. Again, I don't have access to this source code. This is a product group application. But you'll see here I can look at the call stack. I can look at any locals or variables that was happening at that point in time. And it's right here on the screen for me. Or, again, I can download the snapshot file on the right-hand side and then load it up locally into Visual Studio. I know this is a whirlwind tour, but hopefully this is worth the time here. Exceptions are here as well. I can look at individual exceptions, all the different errors you wanted to know, like a null reference exceptions are here. I can start drilling into those. And let's look at the performance. The next thing I would look at, I do want to point out this while I'm sitting here, is there's this idea of workbooks. I mentioned those are pre-canned reports. Show me the newest failures for this app in the last week, and it's a report that's already generated, but it generates it off your data. So it's a nice report for your boss every Monday morning to say, hey, here's my new failures. It's nothing you have to go get. It's already here. Performance metrics. This blade works very similar. I can do the zooming. One thing I like is they do the 95th percentile of the apps or the calls coming in here. I don't care about average. I care about the 90. So my performance is pretty well, doing quite well here. Gives me a window of my work. I can also look at dependencies. What's the performance for blob storage, table storage, database calls, Cosmo DB, whatever you call. I can look at that down in the bottom here. And same concept, I can look at the actual samples. If I drill into one of these samples. Now, of course, you want it to perform well, so that's all good, all in good, right? So that's what's going on here, performance information. This is very similar. One thing I forgot to show you, I wanted to jump back, sorry. I'm going to jump back here. This creating the details for customers on this particular page is causing a lot of null reference errors. If I actually click into the count, I can look at just the null reference errors themselves. I can actually drill in here. Same end-to-end transaction. The one thing I wanted to point out though, again, this is a .NET application. I can see it blows up in the middle with an exception. I get a lot of information if I say show all on the right-hand side. But what's really cool is, again, the .NET framework's running a lot of code here. I can actually click this button and say, I don't care about that. I just want to see my code. So just show me my code, right? And it'll actually take you into the controller that's causing the errors here and actually tell you the line number that it came from. So again, if you're running .NET, very helpful. You don't have to do a whole lot of thinking on where to go start investigating that error. So performance, let me look at alerts real quick. Alerts are those things I can set up to say when something is greater than 20 milliseconds, give me a text, give me an email. When something doesn't fire, we can set up an action group as well. Hey, when this thing's maxed out, running hot 95% all the time, spin up another instance of an app service. I could do all kinds of things here. And then metrics, of course, I can just draw this and say, hey, I want to look at my account. These metrics here are basically all the data that comes out of App Insights. And there's a whole list of things I can pick from. I can actually layer this on top of each other, so I can add another layer on top of that and build this cool graph that I like. And then what's nice, if you have one of those dashboards I showed you in the slides, I can just say, take this and pin it to the dashboard. And now I have that dashboard for that application. I'm going to show you workbooks, because I talked about it a little bit. This is the workbook page. These are accessible from different areas, but there's new failure. I think new failures is cool to know about. Performance failures. Hey, are there any new users out there hitting my site? What are they doing on my site, right? I will say App Insights is great for investigating an error, performance failures, et cetera. That's one of the uses. The other use is who's using it from where and how are they using my app? What's the path they're taking through my app? So this report is, again, one of those canned, call it workbook reports. It's collecting data on all the different calls and the requests through your application, looking at the analysis, the trends, et cetera. So I know I'm going fast, but this is pretty, I think these reports are really, really nice. One of the last sections I want to talk about here, and I know we're coming up on a little bit of time here. I'm gonna push this. Just because this is too fun. So users, who's using my app? How do we know who's using it? How do we know if we provided value? That's what this whole user area here. Again, App Insights does a blend of investigating your app and as well as usability. So this is showing me there's 6.5 thousand users that use this app in the last 24 hours, is what this is saying. And that's great, but okay, give me some more information. What's nice is I can say split this by, again, all that data that you can collect. So I showed you in Visual Studio, I showed you on the metrics blade. I can look at by app version, by city, by county, by device, by whatever. Let's pick country. So when I pick country, it'll actually re-slice this data up for me. Now I get a bigger picture. I can look across time. This app is used, as you'd imagine, in the United States here a lot during the day, not so much at night. And of course, people start waking up again, the app comes alive again. So we get this nice pattern we can look at. I can also scroll down, and we can see which countries and et cetera it came from, because I picked country. I can say view more, investigate, or show me some more data here. And I can scroll down a little more and get more usability. So now I can actually see what country how many users are from what country, how many operating systems are out there hitting this app, and well, in this case, what browser version are hitting as well. Edge is down there, look at that. Edge is way at the bottom. Huh. Nice. There's sessions, events. I know I'm coming up on time here. I like user flows too, so wouldn't it be nice to know when a user goes to my app, you have no idea what they're doing, right? User flows answers that question. So if I say select an event, and let's say we start with the index page. This is where we start. This is the landing page, right? And I say draw it. Show me it for the last 12 hours. Just create this graph for me. It goes out and creates this cool graph. This is how the app, we can move around. This is the flow from somebody clicking home page and the flow they took and how many users took that route to your app. Wouldn't that be great to know that information? Now this is a little overwhelming, so I'm going to go back and say, I want to just know about it for when somebody assigns a ticket to somebody. Like they click this assign ticket button. Maybe you're focusing on that functionality of the app. I can just scroll into this area and say, okay, most 590 sessions went to the home page. They click this reference, and they go to the details, et cetera. A couple of them bombed out over here. Now they click back to the home page here. And then most of them ended the session. So it just gives you a better picture of what's going on. And the other piece I wanted to talk here last is usage. Again, I talked before, we can configure App Insights for that moving window of data. This is where you do that. Data sampling is important. You can actually pick, this is cranked up 100%, 50% is recommended. The more you collect, the more it costs, right? Not that it's that much, but you can control that here. And then the daily cap. It's nice to know, and I set this up on my app, it's nice to know if you're hitting 100 gig, 500 gig, 1,000 gig, send me an email. I want to know about that ahead of time, and then you can set that up with these options here. So, all right. And I'm thinking I'm going to go back to slides real quick and then wrap this up. Right? We're at time? Okay.
Well,
Isn't it 4:15 now? Okay. We'll see if we have time for questions. All right, let me go back. So this project, Surloscope, is a open source JavaScript library that's out there that basically lives on top of Playwright. It uses Playwright as its base. Again, availability tests, I think, are fine for a ping, a heartbeat, see if your app's up. But wouldn't it be nice to actually run a user scenario from anywhere in the world, look at latency, look at the different events and calls, and see how they're using it, and you can actually record those ahead of time. I don't know if anybody ever used Playwright before, but Playwright is a great UI tester. It's similar to Selenium. So I run a bunch of Playwright tests that are headless, and it's very fast for UI testing. But this is exciting because it's coming out soon. It's actually on GitHub. And these are part of in the slides if you wanted to go play with this technology. So real big recap here. App Insights, really think about that as the big picture. How can I look at the metrics, the dashboards, get alerts, notifications of the app itself. Live stream if you want to see your app running live, heartbeat. Application map, very useful, I think. Zoom in and out of all the different services that are connected and they're wired up for you automatically. Workbooks, pre-canned reports, nice. And then of course the integration with DevOps, which is really just for deployment purposes. And then how do you find and fix problems? There's lots of tools there. Smart detection is one of those. Looking at the end-to-end transactions, there's snapshot debugging, there's the profiler, code lens integration if you're doing local development only. And again, machine learning is combing over that data to provide that back to you. Performance profiling is there. Custom instrumentation is where I can actually insert a custom telemetry record. All that data, I showed the different data points you can slice and dice. That's just out of the box with App Insights, beyond the data itself, or beyond the custom pieces. Some resources here in the slide deck. MS Learn is one of our free websites, so you can go actually and go through modules. It's completely free. And basically you go to that website and actually type in whatever you're looking for. So App Insights, if you're looking at mobile or blob or whatever you want to learn about, Microsoft Learn is sitting here. The link for downloading Visual Studio, there's a trial I believe out there as well. And then some other monitoring documentation and so forth. So I think I'll leave it at that. You wanted some time for Q&A. One thing I'll say, sorry. Yeah, in the slide deck, just in case this didn't work, I have some screenshots of these things I showed you in case you wanted to go back. That's a protection plan there. Okay, now go ahead.
Nothing on Slack, but if there's any questions here in the room.
Yeah, any questions in the room? I can't see you if there are, but is anybody in the room?
Just yell it.
Yeah, just yell them if you have them. If not, I'll throw a question out for you.
I've had an issue with RESTful endpoints not getting aggregated. So I have like customer 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and like they all throw errors. And them showing up in the log. It's just like there was an error with the endpoint customer 1. There was an error with endpoint customer 2, and it not combining those things. I'm assuming that's configuration error on my part. But can you speak to that?
Just off the top of my head, it sounds like an instrumentation key. I don't know if your app has JavaScript in the main page, the home page. I don't know what app you're talking about here, but what language I mean. C#. A lot of the home pages you can put, did you put in JavaScript in? Okay, you can actually insert JavaScript at in the header of whatever the shared page is. It sounds like, just off the top of my head, it sounds like the instrumentation key might be off. It's not the right one, not the same one. Not the same one across the user calls. I don't know if that's possible, but if not, we can talk some more.
Question, do you have any examples of where people have used the analytics for data-driven decisions for enhancements?
Data-driven decisions for enhancements. My only example, I suppose, would be the DevOps team collects data and then on how DevOps is used. I know the Windows 11 team does this at a much larger scale, but since Azure DevOps is a service and they're using App Insights, they can collect telemetry that way to see what's not used, what's used, and then they roll that into the next cycle, development cycle. That's the value part of what I was talking about DevOps itself. Does that answer your question? Yes. Yeah, we use that data to see what's used most and what's not used. There's only so many engineers in Microsoft that they spend their time working and they have to figure it out, so they use live telemetry to figure that out. Yeah. Alerting for Teams, the product?
Yeah, alerting 2 teams. I know you can do it via email, but
Oh, alerting 2 teams. I was going to say 2 emails. You could create 2 alerts. Yeah, I would. Yeah, I don't know if you could actually blend that into 1 alert, but I know you can do it with 2. Yeah, off the top of my head, I would just create 2 alerts, 2 different teams. But it's funny you have to do that. I'd have to look at if you can put multiple teams in there, maybe an alias, an AD group or something. Yeah. And one thing that might not have been clear, oh, actually I already said it as far as your app running on-prem, but any other questions?
Could you touch on the value of workbooks versus Monitor?
The value of workbooks versus Monitor. You mean Monitor as in Azure Monitor? Well, Azure Monitor is just a service that's collecting and correlating all that data into log analytic files. The workspaces in Azure, that's a thing that's collecting the data. The workbooks are just a layer on top of that that runs queries and presents it more in more of a report format. They're just canned workbooks. You could create your own canned workbook and save it into the workbook area under your account and share that with your team if you wanted to. But workbooks is just an abstraction layer on top of the data. That's all it is. Yeah. Think of it as an Excel report or something. Yeah, more?
Yeah, I had a question. We've been using App Insights in production for a while. Currently, we're on classic Application Insights. Could you speak to the difference between the classic version and whatever the new log analytics 1 we're supposed to upgrade to?
Sure. So you're running Classic, you're getting a warning, right? Yeah. App Insights Classic will go away soon, please convert. So I'll just call it V2. I don't know if it's V2, but App Insights V2 is coming soon. And the recommendation is use a workspace for the storage instead of the storage when you set it up as Classic, which is what you have, and that's why you're getting that warning. I got that same warning. I don't know when it expires. It seems like this fall it expires, right? Sometime?
February 2024.
Oh, do you have some time? The difference is it's going to be much faster using a log analytic workbook under the workspace under the hood. And unfortunately, I don't know, you can migrate it. It's a one-way street. Once you migrate, you can't go back. The other thing you can do is, I don't know how much data you're pumping in there. You can create a new App Insights today, and it'll create it with that workspace. And then you can just change the app to point to the new workspace. And do you want to keep your old data? Yes. Good question. Do you want your old data?
So I guess one of the reasons we've hesitated is because we turned on log analytics for like our AKS cluster, and it was not cheap. So we were worried there might be a big cost difference. Can you speak to if it should be similar? Or?
I don't know off the top of my head here, but just educated guess it would be, it should be similar because the workspace under the hood, how App Insights works, it's part of the mechanics for it. It's not a cost thing. All that data still goes into storage. How many days of data are you collecting?
Just 30. We're not doing
Just 30.
But like I said, we were kind of surprised when we did the breakcast. We were being approached a lot more.
I would say AKS pumps probably a ton of data depending on how many containers you're running. You could also check your sampling rate, see if it's at 100%. Sounds like it is. Yeah. You're welcome. Other questions? Sorry, I can't see anybody. Well, hey, I appreciate everybody coming here and spending the last hour and a half or hour with me in this last session of the day. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.